The stage lights of the biggest talent show in the world were glowing brighter than ever, but what happened that night, no one in the audience would ever forget. A quiet Filipino teenager walked onto the stage with nothing but a dream in his heart and a voice no one expected. By the end of the night, the crowd would be on their feet, judges would be wiping away tears, and one moment would leave even Simon Cowell completely speechless. But before we begin this incredible story, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this prove that dreams can rise from the most unexpected places. 17-year-old Miguel Santos grew up in a small coastal village in the Philippines. His home was a tiny wooden house standing on thin stilts near the ocean. When the wind blew too hard, the walls would shake, and when the rain poured, the roof would leak into buckets placed across the floor. Miguel's father had once been a fisherman, but after a terrible storm destroyed his boat, the family struggled to survive. His mother worked long hours selling vegetables at the local market, leaving before sunrise and returning long after sunset. Life was never easy. But Miguel had something that kept him going. Music. Every evening, when the sky turned orange and the waves crashed against the shore, Miguel would sit outside the house with an old second-hand guitar someone had thrown away years ago. 2 strings were missing, and the wood was cracked, but to him, it was the most precious thing in the world. He would sing softly into the ocean wind. At first, only the waves listened. Then neighbors began to notice. A fisherman once stopped his boat just to hear Miguel sing. A group of children sat on the sand quietly as his voice floated through the air. His voice was powerful, emotional, and unbelievably pure. But Miguel never believed he was special. To him, singing was simply a way to escape the worries of life. One evening, while Miguel was singing near the shore, his younger sister Ana ran toward him, waving her phone excitedly. "Miguel! Miguel! Look at this!" On the screen was a video of contestants performing on a famous talent show watched all over the world. "You should go there," she said with wide eyes. Miguel laughed. "That show is for amazing singers," he replied. "Not someone like me." But Ana shook her head firmly. "You are amazing." Days passed, but the idea stayed in Miguel's mind. Finally, after weeks of hesitation, he secretly recorded himself singing and submitted an audition video. He never told anyone. Not even his parents. Months later, a message appeared in his email. He had been selected for an audition. Miguel stared at the screen for nearly 5 minutes, wondering if it was real. When he finally told his mother, she held his hands tightly. "We don't have money for travel," she said gently. Miguel nodded. He had already expected that answer. But the next morning something incredible happened. The entire village had heard the news. Neighbors gathered outside their house. Fishermen, market vendors, teachers, children, everyone came together. One man stepped forward and placed money into Miguel's hands. Another followed. Then another. "We believe in you," they said. Within hours, the village had collected enough to send Miguel to the audition. When Miguel arrived at the huge theater, his heart nearly stopped. The building was enormous. Cameras were everywhere. Contestants from different countries filled the halls, each carrying powerful voices and big dreams. Miguel suddenly felt very small. Backstage, he clutched his guitar and whispered to himself, "Maybe I made a mistake." Then a producer called his name. Next contestant. Miguel Santos. The stage doors opened. Bright lights blinded his eyes as he walked toward the giant ex-judge's table. Simon Cowell looked up. "How old are you?" Simon asked. 17, sir." "And where are you from?" "The Philippines." Simon leaned forward slightly. "And what will you be singing tonight?" Miguel swallowed nervously. "A song that reminds me of home." The audience clapped politely. But no one expected what would happen next. Miguel closed his eyes. The first note left his lips. And suddenly the entire theater went silent. His voice was deep, rich, and filled with emotion far beyond his years. Every note carried the sound of the ocean, the struggle of his family, and the hope of his entire village. Within seconds, people in the audience looked at each other in shock. One woman covered her mouth. Another began to cry. Back at the judge's table, Simon Cowell slowly leaned back in his chair, eyes wide with disbelief. Halfway through the song, the entire crowd erupted into cheers. But Miguel kept singing. His voice grew stronger and stronger, soaring through the theater like a wave crashing against the shore. When he hit the final high note, the sound echoed across the stage like thunder. For a moment. Silence. Then the entire theater exploded. The audience jumped to their feet. A standing ovation. People were screaming. Some were crying. One judge wiped tears from her eyes. Simon Cowell sat completely still. For once, he had no words. Finally he leaned forward and spoke quietly into the microphone. Miguel. I have been doing this for a very long time. The crowd fell silent again. And that was one of the most emotional performances I have ever heard. Miguel's eyes filled with tears. Another judge smiled and said, "You didn't just sing, you told your entire life story." The audience roared again. Then Simon turned toward the judges' panel slowly. He looked back at Miguel. And without saying another word, he reached forward and slammed the golden buzzer. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling like falling stars. Miguel dropped to his knees in shock as the crowd screamed louder than ever before. Tears streamed down his face as he looked around the stage covered in gold. For a boy who once sang only to the ocean, the world was now listening. Back in his village, hundreds of people gathered around a small television at the market to watch the moment. When the golden buzzer appeared on the screen, the entire village erupted in celebration. His mother covered her face and cried. His sister jumped up and down screaming, "I told you! I told you!" And thousands of miles away, Miguel stood on the stage, surrounded by gold confetti, realizing that the impossible had just happened. A poor boy from a tiny seaside village had just captured the hearts of millions. And the most beautiful part of the story? This was only the beginning. Because sometimes the loudest voices in the world come from the quietest places. And sometimes the biggest dreams are born in the smallest homes. So if this story inspired you even a little, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories that remind us that dreams are always closer than they seem. Because somewhere out there right now, another voice is waiting to be heard. The night Miguel Santos received the golden buzzer didn't just change his life, it changed the way millions of people looked at dreams. After the semi-final performance, the world began to notice the quiet Filipino teenager with the powerful voice. News channels shared his story. Music pages posted clips of his performance. Even famous singers began reacting to his videos online. But Miguel was still the same humble boy. One evening, after a long day of rehearsals, he sat alone backstage holding his guitar. The huge theater was empty now. Only a few workers were cleaning the stage. Miguel gently strummed a few chords. His mind wandered back to the first time he ever sang. He was only 8 years old then. His father had taken him out on the fishing boat before sunrise. The sky was still dark, and the ocean looked endless. Miguel had been afraid of the deep water. His father noticed his fear and said softly, "When you are scared, sing. Music makes the heart brave." Miguel had laughed at the idea back then, but he tried it. A small, shy song escaped his lips. The waves carried his voice across the water. His father smiled proudly. "You see," he said. "The ocean is listening." That memory stayed with Miguel for years. But life soon became harder for the family. When Miguel turned 13, a violent storm destroyed many boats in their village, including his father's only fishing boat. Without it, the family lost their main source of income. Money became tight. Some nights they had very little food. Miguel watched his mother work harder every day, leaving home before sunrise to sell vegetables at the market. One night he asked her quietly, "Mama, are we going to be okay?" She smiled gently even though she was tired. "As long as we stay together," she said, "we will always be okay." Those words became Miguel's strength. Whenever life felt heavy, he would walk to the beach with his guitar and sing. Sometimes he sang happy songs. Sometimes sad ones. But every song carried the feelings he couldn't explain with words. Years later, that same voice would travel across the world. Back at the competition, the pressure was growing stronger. The final round was approaching. Producers, judges, and fans all expected Miguel to deliver another unforgettable performance. One afternoon during rehearsal, Miguel struggled to hit a high note in the song he had chosen. He tried again. And again. But his voice cracked. Frustration filled his chest. "I can't do it," he whispered. His vocal coach placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can," she said calmly. Miguel shook his head. "What if I disappoint everyone?" She looked directly into his eyes. "People don't love you because you are perfect," she said. "They love you because you are real." That sentence changed everything. Miguel realized something important. The audience didn't fall in love with his voice alone. They connected with his story, his honesty, his heart. The night of the finals. The golden confetti was still falling from the ceiling like shining rain, and Miguel Santos stood frozen in the middle of the stage. The loud cheers of the crowd echoed through the massive theater, but in his heart everything felt quiet, almost unreal. Just minutes ago he was a nervous teenager holding an old guitar, afraid his voice might not be good enough. Now the entire world was watching him. Miguel slowly looked around at the sea of people standing and clapping for him. Some were shouting his name, others were wiping tears from their faces. He had dreamed about singing on a big stage before, but never like this. Simon Cowell stood up from his chair, smiling slightly. "Miguel," he said, raising his microphone, "that performance was absolutely extraordinary." The audience cheered again. "You walked onto the stage looking shy and nervous," Simon continued, "and then suddenly you opened your mouth and delivered something so powerful that this entire room went silent. That is not easy to do." Miguel tried to speak, but his voice trembled. "Thank you, sir." Another judge leaned forward. "I could feel every emotion in your voice," she said softly. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" Miguel wiped a tear from his cheek. "I learned, by singing near the ocean," he replied quietly. The crowd responded with an emotional awe. Simon raised his eyebrows. "The ocean?" Miguel nodded. "Back home, we don't have music schools or vocal coaches. I just sing near the water. The waves, they feel like they sing with me." The audience clapped warmly. Backstage, the host hugged Miguel tightly. "You just made history," he whispered. But even in that moment of celebration, Miguel's thoughts drifted thousands of miles away, back to the small wooden house standing beside the sea. Back in his village, the entire community had gathered in front of the only electronics shop that had a television big enough for everyone to watch. People were squeezed shoulder to shoulder in the narrow street. Children sat on rooftops. Fishermen stood holding their nets. When the golden confetti exploded on the screen, the entire village erupted with joy. Miguel's mother covered her face as tears rolled down her cheeks. "My son," she whispered. Anna, his little sister, jumped excitedly. "He did it! He really did it!" Neighbors hugged each other like they had all won together. And in many ways, they had. The next morning, Miguel woke up in a hotel room that felt bigger than his entire house back home. Sunlight poured through the huge window, and for a moment he forgot where he was. Then his phone started vibrating non-stop. Messages were flooding in. Hundreds, then thousands. People from different countries were sharing clips of his performance online. Within hours, the video had already been viewed millions of times. Miguel stared at the screen in disbelief. His voice, the one that once echoed only across the waves, was now traveling around the world. Later that day, the show's producers invited Miguel back to the theater for interviews. When he walked inside, some of the staff members stopped him in the hallway. "Hey, Golden Buzzer," one of them said with a smile. Miguel laughed shyly. But deep inside, he still felt like the same boy who used to sit on the sand and sing under the stars. During the interview, a reporter asked him a question. "What was the hardest part of your journey?" Miguel thought carefully before answering. "The hardest part was believing I deserved to be here." The reporter tilted her head. "Why would you think that?" Miguel looked down at his hands. "Because where I come from, big dreams often feel impossible." His words touched millions of people watching the interview online. Over the next few weeks, Miguel prepared for the next round of the competition. Vocal coaches helped him improve his breathing. Music producers helped him choose songs. But even with all the professional help, Miguel kept one habit. Every night, after rehearsals, he would go outside alone. Sometimes he sat quietly near the river behind the studio. And he sang. Not for judges. Not for cameras. But for the same reason he always had. Because singing made his heart feel free. Meanwhile, back in his village, life continued as usual. Fishermen left early in the morning. Market vendors arranged vegetables on wooden tables. Children ran barefoot along the sandy roads. But now there was something new in the air. Hope. Children began singing Miguel songs while playing near the shore. Teachers spoke about him in classrooms. Parents told their kids, "If Miguel can do it, maybe you can too." Miguel had unknowingly become a symbol for every child who believed their dreams were too big. The night of the semifinals finally arrived. The theater was even more crowded than before. The audience knew Miguel now. Many had come specifically to see him perform again. Backstage, Miguel held his guitar tightly. His hands were shaking. A producer noticed his nervous expression. "Are you okay?" she asked. Miguel nodded slowly. "I'm just afraid people expect too much now." She smiled warmly. "They don't expect perfection, Miguel. They just want to hear your heart again." When the stage doors opened, the audience immediately began cheering. Miguel walked onto the stage, looking both excited and nervous. Simon Cowell smiled. "Welcome back, Miguel." "Thank you, sir." Simon leaned forward. "Last time you shocked everyone. So tell me, what are you going to do tonight?" Miguel looked at the audience. "Tonight? I'm singing for my family." The crowd applauded softly. Miguel closed his eyes. And once again, the theater fell silent. This time his voice sounded even stronger. Every note carried the love he felt for his parents, his sister, and the small village that believed in him. Midway through the song, the audience began waving their phone lights in the air like thousands of tiny stars. The moment felt magical. When the final note ended, the crowd exploded with applause again. Simon Cowell stood up immediately. "That," Simon said firmly, "is exactly why this show exists." Miguel's eyes filled with tears again. Weeks later, Miguel would go on to perform in the finals, touching millions more hearts around the world. But even after the fame, the interviews, and the global recognition, Miguel never forgot where his voice truly began. Months later, after the show ended, Miguel returned to his village. There were no giant stages. No cameras. No golden confetti. Just the ocean. As he stepped onto the sand, children ran toward him excitedly. "Miguel! Sing for us!" He laughed and sat down on the beach with his old repaired guitar. The same waves crashed against the shore. The same salty wind blew through the air. And Miguel began to sing. But this time, he wasn't singing alone. Dozens of children sat around him, listening carefully, dreaming their own dreams. And Miguel realized something important. Winning the Golden Buzzer had changed his life. But inspiring others. That was the real victory. Because sometimes the greatest voices in the world don't start in big cities or expensive studios. Sometimes they begin in tiny villages, beside quiet oceans, carried by the wind, until the whole world finally listens. And maybe right now, somewhere out there, another young dreamer is singing into the night, hoping someone will hear them too. So if this story inspired you even a little, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because every day we share powerful stories that remind us of one simple truth. No matter where you come from, no matter how small your beginnings may be, your voice can still change the world. The night Miguel Santos received the golden buzzer didn't just change his life, it changed the way millions of people looked at dreams. After the semi-final performance, the world began to notice the quiet Filipino teenager with the powerful voice. News channels shared his story. Music pages posted clips of his performance. Even famous singers began reacting to his videos online. But Miguel was still the same humble boy. One evening, after a long day of rehearsals, he sat alone backstage holding his guitar. The huge theater was empty now. Only a few workers were cleaning the stage. Miguel gently strummed a few chords. His mind wandered back to the first time he ever sang. He was only 8 years old then. His father had taken him out on the fishing boat before sunrise. The sky was still dark, and the ocean looked endless. Miguel had been afraid of the deep water. His father noticed his fear and said softly, "When you are scared, sing. Music makes the heart brave." Miguel had laughed at the idea back then, but he tried it. A small, shy song escaped his lips. The waves carried his voice across the water. His father smiled proudly. "You see," he said. "The ocean is listening." That memory stayed with Miguel for years. But life soon became harder for the family. When Miguel turned 13, a violent storm destroyed many boats in their village, including his father's only fishing boat. Without it, the family lost their main source of income. Money became tight. Some nights they had very little food. Miguel watched his mother work harder every day, leaving home before sunrise to sell vegetables at the market. One night he asked her quietly, "Mama, are we going to be okay?" She smiled gently even though she was tired. "As long as we stay together," she said, "we will always be okay." Those words became Miguel's strength. Whenever life felt heavy, he would walk to the beach with his guitar and sing. Sometimes he sang happy songs. Sometimes sad ones. But every song carried the feelings he couldn't explain with words. Years later, that same voice would travel across the world. Back at the competition, the pressure was growing stronger. The final round was approaching. Producers, judges, and fans all expected Miguel to deliver another unforgettable performance. One afternoon, the night Miguel Santos was announced as the winner did not end when the stage lights turned off. In many ways, that moment was only the beginning of a much bigger journey. After the show finished, reporters surrounded him backstage. Cameras flashed again and again while journalists tried to ask questions all at once. "Miguel, how does it feel to win? What will you do next? Do you plan to release music soon?" Miguel stood there for a moment, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Just days ago he had been a shy contestant waiting nervously for his turn to perform. Now people from different countries were calling his name. He smiled softly and answered the first question. "It feels unreal," he said honestly. "I still feel like the same boy who sings by the ocean." Many people watching the interview later would say that was the moment they truly understood Miguel. Despite the fame, the applause, and the victory, he had not changed. His humility made people admire him even more. That night, after the celebrations ended and the theater finally became quiet, Miguel returned to his hotel room. The city lights outside the window looked beautiful and endless. He placed his guitar on the bed and sat beside it. For the first time since the competition started, everything was silent. No audience. No judges. No cameras. Just him and his thoughts. He picked up the guitar and slowly began to play the same melody he used to sing back in his village. The sound filled the quiet room, and memories rushed into his mind like waves. He remembered the nights when his family struggled to pay bills. He remembered watching his mother walk to the market before sunrise. He remembered the first time he sang in front of his neighbors and how nervous he had felt. Back then, his biggest audience had been maybe 20 people. Now millions had heard his voice. Miguel closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Thank you." The next morning his phone was filled with thousands of messages from fans around the world. People wrote about how his story inspired them to chase their own dreams. One message came from a young girl in Brazil who wrote, "Your story made me believe I can sing too." Another message came from a man in Canada who said, "Your voice reminded me not to give up." Miguel read each message slowly. He realized something important. Winning the competition had given him more than fame. It had given him the power to inspire people he had never even met. Weeks later, Miguel signed his first music contract. The producers wanted to record his first album and share his songs with the world. At first, the recording studio felt intimidating. The microphones were expensive, the equipment looked complicated, and many professional musicians were working around him. But Miguel remembered the advice his vocal coach had given him. People love your voice because it is real. So instead of trying to sound perfect, he focused on singing with the same emotion he always had. During the recording of his first song, the room became completely silent as Miguel's voice filled the studio. When he finished, one of the producers whispered quietly, "That gave me chills." Miguel smiled shyly. Even after all his success, he still found it difficult to believe that his voice could move people like that. A few months later, his first song was released online. Within hours, millions of people started listening to it. Fans shared the music video across social media, praising the emotion in his voice. Many said his songs felt honest and heartfelt in a world where music sometimes felt too commercial. Miguel suddenly found himself traveling to different countries for interviews and performances. He visited cities he had only seen in pictures before, places with tall buildings, bright lights, and huge concert halls. Everywhere he went, people welcomed him warmly. But no matter how far he traveled, his heart always remained connected to his home. One day, during a break between concerts, Miguel sat with his manager and said something surprising. "I want to go back to my village," he said. His manager looked confused. "You just started your international tour. Are you sure?" Miguel nodded. "Yes. I need to go home for a while." A week later, Miguel returned to the same small coastal village where everything had started. But this time something was different. The village had changed. Not because the houses were new or the roads were better. It had changed because of hope. Children ran around pretending to be singers on stage. Some used sticks as microphones while others played old guitars. When they saw Miguel walking down the sandy road, they ran toward him excitedly. "Kuya Miguel! Kuya Miguel!" They surrounded him with huge smiles. One little girl asked shyly, "Can you teach me how to sing like you?" Miguel laughed softly. "I'm still learning too," he replied. Later that evening, he walked down to the beach alone. The ocean looked exactly the same as it had years ago. The waves rolled calmly across the sand, and the sky slowly turned golden as the sun began to set. Miguel sat down and began to play his guitar. The sound blended perfectly with the rhythm of the ocean. Soon a few children noticed him and quietly sat nearby to listen. Then more people joined. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered again, just like the old days. Miguel looked around at the familiar faces. His neighbors. His friends. The people who had believed in him before the world knew his name. He started singing one of his new songs. But halfway through, something unexpected happened. The children began singing along. Their voices were not perfect, but they were full of joy and excitement. Miguel stopped playing for a moment and listened. Hearing them sing his song felt even more special than performing in a giant arena. Because these were the voices of the next generation. After the song ended, Miguel spoke to the group. "When I was younger," he said, "I thought dreams like mine were too big for someone from our village." The crowd listened carefully. "But now I know something important," he continued. "Dreams don't care where you come from." A boy raised his hand curiously. "So anyone can become a singer?" he asked. Miguel smiled. "Anyone who believes in their voice can try." The children cheered. Later that night, Miguel looked up at the stars above the ocean. The same stars he had stared at so many times while dreaming about a different future. He realized that success was not just about fame, money, or applause. True success meant lifting others up along the way. And that was exactly what he planned to do. In the years that followed, Miguel continued making music, performing concerts, and sharing his story around the world. But he always made time to return home and encourage the young dreamers of his village. Because somewhere among those children might be another voice waiting to be heard. Another dream waiting to rise. Another story waiting to inspire the world. And Miguel knew better than anyone that sometimes the most powerful voices come from the quietest places. All it takes is courage, belief, and one moment when the world finally listens. So if this story inspired you even a little, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because every day there are new dreamers rising, new voices waiting to be discovered, and new stories proving that no dream is ever too big. And who knows? Maybe the next voice to change the world is listening right now. You should be proud of yourself. Now let's hear what you've got. Miguel stood in the center of the stage. The music began softly. The first note he sang was gentle, almost like a whisper. But then his voice grew stronger. Every lyric carried his journey, the storms his family faced, the love of his mother, the encouragement of his sister, the support of his village. The entire theater became silent. Some people closed their eyes while listening. Others held hands. Halfway through the song, Miguel's voice rose into a powerful high note that echoed through the entire building. The audience gasped. Even the judges looked amazed. When the final note ended, the silence lasted for 2 full seconds. Then the crowd exploded into the loudest applause of the night. People jumped to their feet. Some were crying openly. The judges stood up too. Simon Cowell slowly clapped while shaking his head in disbelief. That, Simon said, was the performance of a lifetime. Miguel wiped tears from his eyes. "You came here as a shy boy with a dream," Simon continued. "But tonight, you proved that your voice belongs on the biggest stages in the world." The audience cheered again. Hours later, the results would finally be announced. All the contestants stood together on stage, holding hands nervously. The host held the final envelope. The winner of this season's competition. Miguel felt his heart pounding loudly. Is. A pause filled the theater. Miguel Santos. The audience screamed louder than ever before. Golden confetti exploded again. Miguel covered his face with his hands, overwhelmed with emotion. He had done it. The boy who once sang only to the ocean had just won one of the biggest talent shows in the world. Back in his village, people celebrated in the streets. Fireworks lit up the sky. His mother cried tears of. The waves were calm that night, gently touching the shore as Miguel Santos sat alone on the sand. The moonlight reflected across the ocean, creating a silver path on the water. It was the same beach where he had spent countless nights singing as a child, never imagining that one day his voice would travel across the entire world. Even after winning the competition and becoming famous, this place still felt like home to him. The sound of the ocean reminded him where everything had begun. Miguel held his guitar and softly played a melody. It was a new song he had been writing during his travels. The song was about hope, about believing in yourself even when life feels impossible. As he sang quietly into the night, footsteps approached behind him. It was his sister Anna. "You disappeared again," she said with a playful smile. Miguel laughed softly. "I just needed to hear the ocean." Anna sat beside him and looked at the water. Do you ever miss the old days? Miguel thought for a moment. Yes, he said honestly. Life was harder, but it was also simple. Anna nodded. But now you're helping so many people. Miguel smiled. He remembered the letters he received from fans every week. Some wrote about how his music helped them during difficult times. Others said his story gave them courage to follow their dreams. Those messages meant more to him than any trophy. The next morning Miguel visited the small music center he had built for the children of the village. The building wasn't large, but it was filled with laughter and music. Inside, a group of kids were practicing singing together. When they saw Miguel enter, they immediately became excited. Kuya Miguel! They gathered around him with bright smiles. One boy held a guitar almost as big as himself. Listen to what I learned, he said proudly. The boy began playing a simple melody. His fingers were clumsy, and he missed a few notes, but he kept going with determination. Miguel clapped when he finished. That was great, he said. The boy's eyes lit up. Really? Of course, Miguel replied. Every great musician starts exactly like that. The children spent the afternoon practicing songs while Miguel helped them improve their voices. He showed them breathing techniques and taught them how to express emotion while singing. One girl asked a question that made everyone quiet. Kuya Miguel, were you ever afraid to sing in front of people? Miguel nodded slowly. I was terrified. The children looked surprised. But you sing in front of thousands now, another child said. Miguel smiled gently. Yes, but fear never completely disappears. You just learn to be brave enough to sing anyway. The children seemed to understand that. Later that evening, the village gathered again near the beach for a small concert Miguel had promised to perform. Word had spread quickly, and people from nearby towns even came to watch. A simple wooden stage had been built near the water. String lights hung between palm trees, glowing softly in the evening breeze. Miguel walked onto the stage holding his guitar, and the crowd welcomed him with warm applause. He looked around at the familiar faces. These were the people who had supported him long before he became famous. Tonight, he said into the microphone, I want to sing the first song I ever wrote. The crowd became quiet. Miguel began playing slowly. The song told the story of a boy who believed his dreams were too big for his small world, until one day he discovered that dreams grow wherever hope exists. His voice carried across the beach, blending with the sound of the ocean waves. Some people closed their eyes while listening. Others smiled proudly. When the song ended, the applause felt endless. Miguel stepped off the stage and joined his family near the shore. His father looked at him proudly. You've traveled so far, he said. Miguel shook his head gently. No, he replied. I just followed the path that started here. Weeks later, Miguel returned to the city to continue recording music and performing concerts. But he never forgot the promise he made to himself to use his voice not just for success, but for inspiration. During one interview, a reporter asked him a question many fans were curious about. What keeps you motivated now that you've already achieved your dream? Miguel thought carefully before answering. My dream was never just about winning a show, he said. My dream was to prove that where you come from doesn't decide where you can go. The interviewer nodded thoughtfully. Miguel continued traveling and performing across different countries. In every city, fans sang along to his songs. Concert halls filled with people who connected with the emotion in his voice. But the moment that touched him the most happened during a concert in another country months later. After the show ended, a young boy waited near the backstage exit holding a small guitar. When Miguel came out, the boy approached him nervously. Sir, I learned to sing because of you, the boy said. Miguel knelt down so they were at the same height. That's amazing, he replied. The boy smiled shyly. One day I want to sing on a big stage like you. Miguel placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Then start practicing today, he said. Every great journey begins with a single song. The boy nodded excitedly. Moments like that reminded Miguel why he loved music so much. Music wasn't just entertainment. It was connection. It was hope. Years passed, and Miguel's career continued to grow. His songs reached millions of listeners around the world. He performed on huge stages and collaborated with famous artists. But even with all the success, he always made time to return home to the small village that shaped him. One evening, he stood again on the same beach where he had once sung alone to the waves. The sky was filled with stars, just like it had been when he was a child. Miguel began singing quietly, letting the ocean carry his voice into the night. He realized something beautiful. His journey proved that dreams don't belong only to the lucky or the powerful. They belong to anyone brave enough to believe in them. From a small village by the sea to the biggest stages in the world, Miguel's voice had traveled farther than he ever imagined. And somewhere out there, another young dreamer was probably standing near a beach, a street corner, or a small room, singing into the night and hoping someone would hear them. Because sometimes the world's most powerful voices begin in the quietest places. And when those voices finally rise, they remind us of something important. No matter who you are. No matter where you come from. Your voice matters. And your dream might be the next one to inspire the world. So if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Because the next incredible dream might already be waiting, just one song away. The wind coming from the ocean was cool and gentle as Miguel Santos stood on the small wooden stage built on the beach. Lanterns swayed softly above the crowd, and the sound of waves created a peaceful rhythm in the background. The entire village had gathered again to hear him sing. For many people there, Miguel was not just a famous singer anymore. He was proof that dreams could grow even in the smallest places. After finishing his song, Miguel looked out at the crowd. He saw fishermen who had known him since childhood, teachers who had encouraged him, neighbors who once listened to him sing while fixing their fishing nets. The applause slowly faded, and Miguel stepped down from the stage. His mother walked toward him with a warm smile. "You've made everyone proud," she said softly. Miguel shook his head gently. "You made me who I am," he replied. His mother laughed quietly. "I only gave you food and advice. The rest came from your heart." Later that night, after most people had gone home, Miguel stayed near the shore. The moonlight reflected on the water, and the peaceful sound of the waves filled the silence. He sat down in the sand and began writing lyrics in a small notebook he always carried with him. The new song was about journeys. About how life sometimes takes you far away from home, only to remind you how important home really is. While he was writing, he noticed a young boy standing nearby. The boy looked shy and nervous. Miguel smiled and waved him closer. "What's your name?" he asked. "Daniel," the boy replied quietly. Daniel held a small, worn-out guitar in his hands. "I heard you singing earlier," the boy said. "I want to sing like you someday." Miguel studied the guitar. It looked old and scratched, but he could tell the boy cared about it. "That's a great dream," Miguel said. Daniel looked down at the sand. "But my parents say singing can't change my life." Miguel remembered hearing similar words when he was younger. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "People often say that because they're afraid," Miguel explained. "They don't want us to be disappointed." Daniel looked up. "So should I stop dreaming?" Miguel smiled. "Never." The boy's eyes brightened slightly. Miguel continued speaking. "When I was your age, I used to sit right here and sing to the ocean. No audience, no stage, no applause." Daniel listened carefully. "But the ocean listened," Miguel said. "And one day, the world did too." Daniel held his guitar tighter. Miguel picked up his own guitar and played a simple melody. "Let's sing together," he suggested. Daniel hesitated at first, but then slowly joined in. their voices blended softly with the sound of the waves. For Miguel, that moment felt just as meaningful as performing in front of thousands of people. Because he knew what it meant to encourage someone at the beginning of their journey. The next day Miguel traveled back to the city to continue his music career. His schedule was busy again with recording sessions, interviews,